The defining story of the 2024 election is the defining story of American history. Americans have consistently chosen to preserve white supremacy over democracy. But what happens after each election is that we obsess over tiny demographic groups that can sometimes tilt an election on the margins, or we allow the huge majority of white voters to escape accountability for their ongoing efforts to protect white privilege at all costs, as long as they can deflect to a semi-plausible, non-racial explanation for their action. It's the economy, stupid. No, it's white supremacy. In 1776, when Jefferson wrote that all men are created equal, 41 of the 56 men who signed the Declaration of Independence enslaved black people. From the very beginning, they chose white supremacy over democracy. In 1788, when the Constitution was ratified, the framers counted enslaved black people as 3/5 of a person. They chose white supremacy over democracy. In 1820 and 1850, when Maine and California entered the Union as free states, Congress crafted compromises to preserve the balance of power with slave states. In 1858, when Lincoln ran for Senate, he expressed his opposition to racial equality and voting rights for black people. "I am in favor of having the superior position assigned to the white race," he declared. In 1860, despite Lincoln's promise not to rock the racial apple cart, 11 southern states seceded from the Union when he was elected president and launched a bloody civil war that killed hundreds of thousands of Americans so they could protect slavery. In 1865, when Lincoln finally announced he would support limited voting rights for black Union soldiers and very intelligent black people, John Wilkes Booth, standing in the audience at the White House, vowed that it would be Lincoln's last speech. 4 days later, Lincoln was assassinated. In the Reconstruction era from 1865 to 1877, when General Sherman gave formerly enslaved black people up to 40 acres and a mule, Congress passed civil rights laws and the nation ratified 3 new constitutional amendments. Lincoln's successor, President Andrew Johnson, didn't get the memo, rescinded Sherman's field order, vetoed civil rights bills, and pardoned thousands of former Confederate soldiers who fought against the Union. In 1877, when Congress couldn't decide the winner of the disputed 1876 presidential election, Lincoln's Republican Party abandoned black people, ended Reconstruction, and withdrew federal troops from the South, leaving black people at the mercy of the Ku Klux Klan and white terrorists. Also, that Republican Rutherford B. Hayes could be installed as president. In 1898, when voters in Wilmington, North Carolina elected a multiracial government, angry white supremacists led a violent insurrection, overthrew the government, killed hundreds of innocent black people, and expelled thousands of others to leave the city. That happened on November 10, 1898, 126 years ago today. In 1948, when Democrat Harry Truman signed an executive order abolishing segregation in the military and the party adopted a civil rights plank, segregationist Strom Thurmond bolted from the party and ran for president as a Dixiecrat. In 1964 and 65, after Democrat Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, white Southerners fled the Democratic Party after more than a century of support. Then, from 1968 on, Republicans created a Southern strategy to lure disaffected white voters away from the Democratic Party, and no Democratic candidate for president has ever won the white vote since then. In 2008, when Barack Obama was elected, it was not because white voters finally saw the light. They voted against him and were so alarmed by the results that they created the Tea Party, enacted dozens of new restrictive voter ID laws, and promoted a TV game show host to question Obama's birth certificate. In 2013, when the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act, which had just been approved 7 years earlier with a bipartisan 98-0 Senate vote, Republicans refused then and have refused since to renew this landmark voting rights law. And in 2021, when Donald Trump lost to Joe Biden, he incited a violent mob to overturn the results of a free and fair election. So it was no surprise in 2024 when a twice impeached convicted criminal who promised to pardon the insurrectionists who led the January 6th rebellion against the U.S. government ran for president, that 60% of white men and 53% of white women voted to bring him back to the White House. They were the descendants of the white people who pardoned the Confederates after the Civil War, reneged on the promise of Reconstruction, and fled the Democratic Party when it finally allowed black people to join. So miss me with any analysis of the 2024 campaign that fails to center the predictable role of white voters in protecting their privilege, and spare me with the lofty rhetoric of the sanctity of American democracy. The history of America is a violent, tragic story of disturbing compromises among white people from generation to generation to keep other white people happy, not only at the expense of black people, but at the expense of democracy.